Hello, and welcome to another episode of Superpowers, the show where you get to experience the extraordinary. And today, I have to say, I really do have an extraordinary guest. And I say that, and not lightly, because we've had some fairly impressive guests here in the past. But I have with me Ernie Jackson. And Ernie is somebody who is using a superpower that really we all have, and unfortunately we just don't really use that superpower enough, I don't think. And that superpower is a simple one, and it's one that you hear all the time that we should use, and it's love. And what Ernie did was he applied love in a situation where it was just some extraordinary circumstances, and he's going to tell us all about that. And the fact that he did it, and the fact that it's something that we can all do, we have to make the choice to do it, I thought made it worthy of having Ernie come and talk to us about it today. And so I think without anything further, I would just love to jump right to Ernie Jackson. So, hello, Ernie. How are
Hey,
you?
Karl, I'm great, man. How you doing? Thanks for having me on. I'm really appreciative.
Oh, absolutely. I'm thrilled to have you here with us today, and I do want to just kind of jump right in with your story, and
Sure.
let's start just, I think, with a little bit of background, Ernie. I think just kind of who you are, who you were, what led up to the event, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yes, sir. Well, I was like so many of us in the world today. I was a busy working professional. I was busy providing for my family, but I over the course of many years got out of balance. I ended up giving my best of who I am and my personality and affecting change to others, to the world, to work and tenants and owners. And I ended up kind of neglecting my family. And I got to a point. I mean, the entire life of my son, Quentin Stone Jackson, I was engaged more with work than I was my family. And I'd already kind of alienated my wife, Christine. I had already kind of alienated my daughter, Cheyenne. And I was afraid I was going to get to a point I was going to alienate my son, Quentin, because again, I was out of balance. And we ended up having an accident that took my son's life. And I think, in all honesty, that's when some really amazing things began to happen, starting with the accident scene.
And that's why we're here, and that's what I want you to talk about. So tell us about the accident scene, and what happened.
Well, Carl, let me just backtrack a little bit. I mean, I'm a kind of a guy who's like so many guys on the world. I'm not very attentive. I don't notice things as well as I should. And in the weeks leading up to the accident, I began to notice things that I would otherwise notice. I felt change coming, and if somebody had tried to explain that to me 10 years before the accident, I would have thought they were crazy. But I felt change to the point that I cleaned my office, and I didn't plan on leaving, but I just felt something coming, which was kind of odd and unusual. We changed our vacation plans to avoid death, which it just doesn't make any sense. But we always go to Rocky Point for our annual trip, my 1 week out of the year to reconnect with my family. And that year it was the year of the swine flu, and there was a shooting down in Rocky Point. So everybody around us told us, "Don't go to Rocky Point, you'll die." So we changed our plans to avoid death. But we ended up, I know, I mean, these are the ahas. These are the
Right.
ahas that we have to pay attention to. It's like, what is
Yeah.
that whisper? What is going on? Why do I feel this way?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we changed our plans to go to Lake Powell. And the whole trip to Lake Powell we were just kind of on edge. We felt like we were being pursued.
Mm.
I never feel like I'm being pursued, but we felt like we were being pursued. And I actually had a sense that maybe I was going to die. And I was okay with it because I felt like I was out of balance. I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. I thought I was meant for more. But we made it. You know, we had a flat tire. We got a couple flat tires, but we got down there, we got to the lake, and had a blast. But even on the lake, it was kind of eerie. Our son Quentin was different. He was quieter than normal, staring off into the distance. But he vacationed hard when he wasn't sitting quietly. So the vacation wrapped up, and I had new tires on the jet ski trailer. I had two spares because you know what, Karl, I'm in control.
There you
I've
go.
got this. We're good, and we're heading home. And I keep looking over my shoulder. We felt that there was an issue. There was a problem. Something was wrong. And we got to the Four Corners area, and the trailer, the axle broke. And to be honest, I was giddy. I
Ah,
was so excited. We're done with the trailer. We're done with the jet skis. We're out of here. We'll be home in 6 hours. We got it beat. Whatever it was, we got it beat.
yeah.
We called AAA to have the trailer picked up. We called our dear friends, the owners of the trailer, and say, your trailer will be in Cortez. And then our world turned upside down. We were 30 feet off the road. I know because they measured. Christine and I, my wife Christine and I, we were outside the vehicle on the passenger side. So we're more than 30 feet off the road. When a young lady, not under the influence of anything, no drugs, no alcohol, she was just tired, fell asleep on the curve leading to the pullout that we were pulled out in, went off the road, came into our area, airborne. My wife saved my life when she screamed. She screamed because she saw this. Christine screamed in such a way that I turned 90 degrees because my back was facing her as I was standing on the passenger side of the trailer. I would have taken the impact on the small of my back.
Mm.
I don't think that would have gone well for me.
No.
I managed to turn and take the impact on my hip. The next thing I know, I'm laying down, looking up, and there's dust everywhere. There's a bumper that's not ours. I'm laying on the side of our Suburban. So I started off at the back side of a trailer that was hitched to our Suburban. I land on the passenger side rear door of our Suburban, and I look up to this freak show, and I look to my right, and I see my wife's torn and crumpled body. I mean, this is completely and totally surreal, Karl. It was just like,
Yeah.
just so surreal. I've taken an impact. I might have blacked out. I land, there's dust, there's a bumper, there's my wife's torn and twisted body. My first thought was, she's dead.
Mm.
Her and I were outside the vehicle. She's dead. I roll over on my back. I've had enough, experience to know I need to do a self-assessment. I'm checking myself to see if I'm missing any limbs. I was surprised, candidly, that I wasn't. I
Mm-hmm.
look further to my left, and there's my son, and he's outside the vehicle, and he's laying there between the Suburban and the hitched trailer, and I drag myself over to him, and he's perfect, other than a gash over an eye, and his ankle was mangled and dirt in his mouth. And these are pretty graphic images in my memory, in my mind's eye, and I'm grateful that Christine doesn't have to have those images. But over the course of the next 20 minutes before the first responders arrived, when I looked at him, there was nothing going on in his eyes. His eyes were open, the stare was fixed. So I know that he wasn't conscious, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was having an onotonic response where his body was breathing, but his soul, his spirit had already left. It took about 20 minutes or so, but then he eventually took his last breath by the time the first responders came. But there was a moment there that is key. to everything. I mean, everything I'm talking about, and I'm leaving out a lot of details, and I can go back and fill in gaps if you want me to. But there's a moment there that is why we're here talking today. And the young lady, Amanda, she fell asleep at the wheel. She came into the pullout area, took me out, drove over the top of my wife, and then went off the edge down an embankment and climbed out and came back to see what was going on, what had happened, what she was responsible for. And she went to my wife first, and my daughter was with my wife. My mother-in-law, Nellie, was with my wife, and my wife died and came back. And Amanda went to Cheyenne, and Cheyenne looked at her and said, "It's going to be all right," which my daughter still doesn't know how amazing she is. I don't know if she'll ever figure it out. In that moment, I don't know that she even knew what was going on, and she had it worse than all of us, but we'll cover that if you want. So Amanda left Cheyenne and Nellie and Christine and came over to me. There wasn't a word spoken between the two of us. She walked over. I'm laying on the ground with my son. There's blood dripping down my face. There's blood on my leg. She looked down at me, and I looked up at her, and my heart broke for her. She looked down, and I could see her soul, Karl. I could see the pain that she was in. She was horrified. She was completely overcome and horrified and at a loss for what she was party to from a worldly perspective, what she was responsible for. She was falling apart. And I looked into her eyes and I saw myself. I saw myself. It was, I saw a pain in her that I just wanted to take away. And it was, again, so surreal. And I can't say I was this kind of person before. I mean, I really wasn't a forgiving person before. And I mean, in wanting to take her pain, I wasn't even, I mean, let's be real. I'm not even thinking about forgiving somebody. I didn't understand forgiveness. This is raw. This is real. This is happening. It's not about should I forgive or should I not forgive. This was just a reaction of, you're in pain. I don't want you to carry this pain with you.
Right. Yeah.
And that, something in that forgiveness, if you will, something in that wanting to take that away from her as I'm with my son taking his last breaths, shifted something within me. And I believe made all of the amazing things that were to come possible, allowed them to happen sooner.
Yeah, I just want to spend a second with you on that. You know, because in that moment, it was a different response for you. It's also it's different that your reflection on it is that you saw more in her journey and in her pain, really, than you were doing in yourself. I wonder, have you ever speculated about that and why that would have been that she kind of took the front burner in the situation?
Karl, that's a great question. I mean, each and every one of us, as an individual, everybody who's watching this broadcast, this recording, all of us are individuals. All of us have different experiences, and we're a product of our experiences. My experiences impacted what happened and why I looked at her and felt for her. My experiences are, I grew up in a rough, a violent home. My father was violent, and he would beat my mom and beat my sister Tina, and I was powerless to do anything about it. So I got to a point where I was able to drive. So come 16, I was able to get a 1968 Camaro. I mean, of course, it was used. And I drove I drove with a suicidal bent. This was my outlet. I wasn't drinking, I wasn't partying, I was painfully shy. I drove with a suicidal bent. And I would get behind the wheel on a daily basis and say, is today my day to die as a result of the way I'm driving? And I would immediately say afterwards, please, please, please don't let me be responsible for the death of another through my foolish acts. I lived that mantra for a lot of years, from the age of 16 to 20 or whatever. I lived that mantra. It was ingrained in me. And when I looked into Amanda's soul at the accident scene, as I'm holding my son, Quentin, who's taking his last breaths, I saw her living my pain, living my nightmare. So that's the context. And in that context, for me, it was the natural reaction. Amanda, and I didn't know her name at the time, obviously. I don't want you to live with that pain. Give me that pain. You know, and not a word
Right.
was spoken, but that was
Yeah.
the thought. And it was, I mean, I didn't sit there and stare in her eyes for 5 minutes. I mean, all this happened in the better part of 3 seconds.
Right.
I
Yeah.
looked at her and I'm like, give me that.
So at this point, what's happened is you have made contact with Amanda, and you have, seen her face. You've looked in her eyes, but there's an awful lot more to this journey of forgiveness that you experienced, and an awful lot more that just you did. You didn't just say "I forgive you." You actually lived "I forgive you," and
We
so
demonstrated it in a
you,
court.
so yeah. So let's start talking about what happened now from this moment forward after you saw Amanda, and you felt that you saw yourself in her, and you were not feeling anger,
Right.
you were feeling forgiveness, and so then what manifested as a result of that?
Well, there's a lot, Carl, and I mean, I don't know if we have enough time, and I don't want to gloss over too much, but
Yeah.
when parents have a child transition, it's a nightmare beyond measure. We all grieve differently. I
Hmm.
mean, it's the result of the failure of too many marriages because a man and a woman aren't able to come to terms with their own grieving differently. The very next day, I'm in Christine's hospital room. Well, she's in with IR, and she's in critical care, and she's awake. And the pastor comes, and we celebrate Quentin. We talk about Quentin, and Christine, who is the most loving person, is screaming for revenge.
Hmm.
And I'm just, I honor her and I let her speak, of course, in this raw place, not even 24 hours after. Um, and that was just kind of, we went through that journey together. She was grieving and like crying and how I would like to grieve and how I wish I could have grieved. Me, I was already talking about this is wild and this is amazing. But Karl, to your question, it it took it was it took about a year
Hmm.
before the victim's advocate started communicating with us, the assistant DA started communicating with us, and we sat down with the investigator, the lead investigator in Conifer. He came to visit us and wanted to talk to us. And at that point, I declared myself openly and said, I'm forgiving Amanda and I don't want her to serve any jail time. And he didn't know how to take me. Interestingly, as I was, I mean, reminded yesterday by my wife in our grieving process, her and I never really had that conversation. So when I made that public declaration, I looked at her on my left to see how she was going to take that. And don't get me wrong, she got there. She got
Yeah.
there. but
Interesting.
it took her longer. But at that point, there's a public declaration. As the months passed, we filled out a victims advocacy statement where I actually published it in our second book. We
Hmm.
talked about forgiveness. We talked about why. We talked about the spiritual journey. We talked about the lessons we're learning. And we said we don't want her to serve any jail time at all. And then, before you know it, before you know it, 1 year and 51 weeks had passed.
Hmm.
And we're sitting in a courtroom.
Right.
We get to the courtroom in Durango, Colorado, and it's tense. Naturally so. I mean, my words don't do it justice. We've been through hell. Our son's transitioned. Now nearly 2 years have passed. While we have forgiven Amanda, we haven't talked to Amanda. We haven't seen Amanda. And here's the day that we walk into a courtroom and we face her.
Mm.
Before we go into the courtroom, we ask the victim's advocate and the assistant DA, can we talk to Amanda? And they both looked at each other with that look like, really? Are we going to allow this? Because normally this doesn't go well. And they said, we're going to have to ask her. So we get into the courtroom. Amanda's on my right. I still don't recognize her. She's been carrying this burden for 1 year and 51 weeks.
Hmm.
She's gained who knows how many pounds. I would guess 50.
Oh.
Was a clear complexion. Her skin, it was pockmarked, and she had this most awful cough. She has suffered for 1 year and 51 weeks. So we're in the courtroom, and it's just, again, surreal. I speak about our victims advocacy statement and wanting to forgive and why. Amanda speaks, much to my surprise. She spoke about what she's learning from this. And then the judge spoke for what seemed like 10 minutes. And he was explaining why he was going to rule the way he was going to rule. And the short of it was, even though we had forgiven her, even though we didn't want her to serve jail time, he wanted her to serve 10 days so she could understand that she paid something for this unbelievable accident. And at that point, she was going to go straight to jail. So she said goodbye to her parents, and there's hugs and kisses and tears, and we're waiting. She finished with her family, and she came over to us with her hand outstretched to shake my hand, and I wrapped her up in a hug, and I whispered in her ear, and I said, "We've been worried about you. We've been worried about you." She hugs my wife, Christine. She hugs Cheyenne, our daughter. We exchange contact information, and she goes to serve 10 days. 10 days later, she's released, and she no longer has a horrible cough. That bad case of bronchitis she had been dealing with had healed.
Hmm.
The healing was beginning to happen for her.
Yeah.
And Karl, it goes on from there. We're just, everybody in the courtroom didn't know how to take us. They were just
Yeah.
kind of aghast.
Right.
But later that summer,
Uh-huh.
we met Amanda and her mom and her grandma for breakfast.
Ah.
Later that summer, we went in, well, after having breakfast, we headed into the reservation to participate in a ceremony. And it goes on and
Hmm.
on and on. We're still in contact with her,
Yeah.
sporadic, a couple times a year.
Yeah.
We've got together with several times over the years.
I want to go back just for a second, Ernie, because your process in this and your forgiveness was, as you said, it was almost kind of more of a reaction, and it was kind of spontaneous. And I'm going to go ahead and just speculate and suspect that it was a little bit of divine intervention there happening with you. But let's talk about Christine, because even at a year, even at 2 years, that sort of an emotional trauma
Right,
is huge. And
right.
there probably isn't anyone on the planet that would begrudge her for, even at this point, not having feeling any sort of forgiveness, but just feeling that something had been taken from her. So talk a little about that and how she got to where she got also, you know, and maybe to like just sort of what your involvement in that was. And do you think
That's
that
a
you influenced that with her in any
that's a
way?
that's a great question, and it's a wonderful dichotomy. I point out when I speak publicly that I mean, people look at me today and they're like, well, he's just a good guy. And I can't say that. I mean, I'm an okay guy, but Christine's better than me. Christine's known God for her whole life. She's a practicing Catholic. She understands forgiveness, where I didn't. I had never read the words. She's somebody you would expect her to forgive immediately. So don't think that, you know, because I forgave quick and it took her longer that I'm any different or better than Christine, because that's wrong. I mean, we can't judge and look at it that way. But
Right.
Christine, it took her time. I mean, it took her time. And over the years, I mean, it's been 9.5 years now. Over the years, we've been more and more open and talked about it more and more amongst ourselves. And she said, you know what, honey, I didn't truly forgive until I saw her in person in the courtroom.
Oh,
And it
interesting.
had been 2 years. I mean, because
Right.
at that point
Sure.
you see one another and you are able to embrace one another and you see the emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my wife got there and I think my daughter says much the same thing. I mean, and one of them, I think it was my wife in the courtroom. My daughter didn't forgive Amanda until she eventually had sat down and had a meal with her, and
Really?
that might have been 3 years after the accident.
Right. Right.
So it takes time. And when I speak publicly now, I I tell people it's not a race. I mean, you get there when you get there. It's
No,
not,
it's
you know,
not.
you don't have to do it fast. You get there when you
No,
get
it's
there.
not. It's
But
not.
it'll help you when you finally get to that place where, you know, you understand and holding on to that anger and that rage and wanting revenge, you're doing yourself more harm than the person who's the object of that hate.
Well, exactly. And you know, one of the great misconceptions is that forgiving people, it, you know, that you're on a sort of a higher moral plane and they're beneath you, and that you're really
Yeah,
letting them off the hook, which is not it
not it at
at
all.
all. No, it's not it
Not
at all.
not it at all. I mean, and I speak to forgiveness at that level. I mean, I was not a regular churchgoer. I hadn't read the New Testament at the time of the accident. I was still trying to find my faith. So everything that I'm experiencing and feeling and describing all happened outside of a faith. I mean, a lot of people hear me today and they're like, "Oh, he must be this. He must be this faith or this. He's very religious." No, this when this occurred, it was outside of a religion. It was human to human. See,
Hmm.
forgiveness and how we relate to one another is human to human. And there's no moral ground. There shouldn't be a moral ground in how we relate to one another.
Right.
We are all the same in
Yeah.
some level. And this is a key point that I just don't have adequate words to address this point that we're all the same. And when I looked into Amanda at the accident, I saw myself.
Yeah.
We can't judge one another for what somebody's done or what's happened. We can't judge it away and remove it and say, well, they deserved it. That's it could be us. It could have been me that caused that accident.
Hmm.
And I forgave that because I saw it in her. It's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
you're living my nightmare. I
Yeah.
mean, if we think we're holier than thou and better than one another, we're missing the point. But that's the world we live in.
Right.
And I'm hoping what we went through as a family and what I went through with forgiving can maybe wake somebody up to that. It's like, oh, don't judge somebody. We all, I mean, who among us is perfect? Who among us doesn't make mistakes?
Yeah.
Who among us doesn't get distracted when they drive?
Right.
And how many times do you say, wow, I'm glad nothing happened in that moment of being distracted? And then, you know what?
Yeah.
How many of us have driven while tired?
I have had moments actually where I know for sure that I have dozed just for a
Right.
second, you know.
And you know, Carl, we talk about forgiveness, and so many times we talk about forgiveness in terms of forgiving somebody else.
Right.
Well, you know what, my friend? You know what's harder? Coming to terms and learning to forgive yourself for whatever you're holding on to.
Yeah.
That's harder than
Right.
forgiving that person over there that did the unthinkable, the
Yeah.
unspeakable.
Right.
Because if we hold ourselves at fault for anything, we
Hmm.
don't, I mean, it takes us even longer to let ourselves off the hook.
Question for you, just along those lines. To what extent do you think that Amanda was was doing that to herself?
I don't think she let herself off the hook until the court and until she served her 10 days. And I really honor the judge for understanding that. I mean,
Right.
for her to show up in the courtroom with a chronic case of bronchitis and coughing and sickly,
Hmm.
and to go serve her 10 days in a cold jail cell and to come
Yeah.
out healed,
Yeah.
that speaks to the power of her accepting, her understanding that she was forgiven.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's, I mean, again, this is one circumstance. You saw me speaking to a group of parents
Yeah.
whose kids have transitioned,
Yes.
and they walked into this room to hear me talk about forgiveness
Right.
and talk about a dangerous conversation for me, the speaker. But and I
It
started
was.
that. I mean, because
Yeah.
forgiveness without context is a really challenging issue to deal with because there's judgment, and you really expect me to forgive that person that deserve to be forgiven.
Right.
You know, you want to, and I tell people you have to understand that if you're not forgiving, it's like you drinking poison and expecting the person over there to die. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You're angry and vengeful, and you're hurting yourself.
Yes.
And
Right.
I would say, okay, you haven't forgiven yet. Okay, you'll get there. But then I'd add, do you really want to carry this with you when you pass? Do you really want to carry the rage and the anger and the desire to hurt somebody because of what they've done when
Hmm.
you transition?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
I think most would agree that no. And so forgiveness is for us as an individual first,
Right.
uh, because we're just. I don't even want to imagine, Karl, what would have happened if I didn't forgive in the way I forgave.
Hmm.
Because beforehand, I wasn't really a forgiving person. I
Yeah.
know my rage. I
Yeah.
know my anger. I know the beast within. I mean, and thankfully, he's kind of gone away. I'm very grateful. But I know I would have destroyed myself.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
incredible.
you know, honestly, too, I feel like to an extent, uh, Christine was really spared, and I say that because in other situations and having heard other stories, I'm aware of. For example, one woman was having difficulty forgiving somebody that had murdered her son 17 years ago. And there was nobody in that room that said, "Oh, come on, it's really time for you to get over that." Not a one. What we did instead was everybody prayed for her that somehow she could find, you know, some peace in her heart from something that had been absolutely plaguing her for 17 years. And, you know, thank goodness for you and for Christine and the family that her process allowed her to move through, you know, as quickly as it did.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I mean, it's such an interesting conversation. I mean, it's different for all of us, and we can't judge and compare.
No.
It took Christine 2 years, but she got there.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's wonderful. It's wonderful that she got there that quick.
Yeah.
Um, I met with a woman probably within 2 years, 2.5 years of Quentin's passing,
Mm-hmm.
who was still struggling with the murder of her daughter that happened 20 years prior.
Right.
And I'm all bright and I'm all, you know, trying to help. I'm trying, burning hot with love and energy. And I convinced her to go see a medium. And immediately I thought, what have I done?
Mm.
And she did. And she
Yeah.
said, Ernie, she came back. It was weeks later. Ernie, we have to talk. And
Yeah.
we sat in a conference room and she spoke for a full hour.
Right.
And then she said, Ernie, what do you think?
Yeah.
And I said, look, there's 3 points in you talking where you said, well, this was strange and this was weird and this is unusual. How could this medium know this? And I said, I know what that is.
Hmm.
I said, I know that's your daughter. And
Yeah.
she's giving you validations that it's her. I said, now you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And my dear friend, you have to understand and hear what she said. She said, Mom, get over it. Mom, get over it. And so much of this forgiveness conversation for me goes back to the fact that we are eternal.
Right.
And please understand, me saying that isn't based on scripture because I know that may alienate some when I start, people assume or presume that I'm thumping on a Bible or I'm preaching. No, this is just what I saw.
Right.
And in talking to other people, this is normal.
Yeah.
We are eternal. So let's deal with this, whatever pain, whatever anger, whatever rage we have within us, whatever unforgiveness that we have within us, let us process it with the understanding that we are eternal because our son Quentin has shown us that and it's true for so many others. For me, you can't have well, you can. I mean, I honor those that can forgive without the understanding that we're eternal.
Yeah.
But for me, it makes it easier. It
Yeah.
really does. And I hope for anybody listening today, it makes it easier for you too.
Yeah. Well, and I'll be honest. When I heard you speak at the Helping Parents Heal conference, that's a group that is very open to mediumship, and they are definitely understanding, that we are eternal, and just because their kids were no longer in those bodies doesn't mean that their kids weren't still there.
Right.
But there were people who were not happy with you in that. And there were some pretty, it was almost as though they were angry at
True.
you for
It's
what you were
true.
saying. It was
It
kind of a,
is.
how dare you say I should, and I think a lot of this comes from the let people off the hook
Right.
mentality or understanding of forgiveness. They did something wrong, and I'm not about to say it's
Right.
okay.
Right. Carl, you're right. I mean, if I had my choice, I would not be talking about forgiveness. I would be talking about the signs. I would be
Yeah.
talking about the signs. However, I know that what happened to us and that spontaneous forgiveness and my willingness to talk about it makes me a perfect candidate to get up and in
Yeah.
front of a crowd and talk about it. And I know, I mean, it's been almost 10 years now. And, from where I was and for year one, year two, year three, year four, where I was just giddy. I was on fire. I was so excited. You could not shut me. You wouldn't dare try to shut me up. And I know that crazy,
Yeah.
uncontrollable energy annoyed some people, but
Yeah.
I had people say, Ernie, when I first heard you speak and I first heard you talk about signs and forgiveness, I wanted to hurt you.
Hmm.
But now, and this in this one example, 2 or 3 years had passed. But
Yeah.
now, Ernie, I understand. And I know. I mean, I've had people sit in a crowd and throw daggers at me. I could see them. If they could hurt me, they would hurt me.
Yeah.
But you know
Yeah.
what? I mean, I had 55 minutes to talk. I spoke for 30, and I insist that we have a dialogue because we have to talk about it. And
Yeah.
if you're angry, let's talk about it. I had
Yeah.
somebody say, really, Ernie, do you really expect me to forgive? And I said, no, I'm not here to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
We're human animals, we're human beings. We don't like being told what to do.
No, we
I'm
don't.
not telling you to
Yeah.
forgive.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that when you get there, however long it takes, it's going to help.
Hmm.
It'll help.
Yeah.
It'll help because then you're holding on to that. You're creating an ulcer. You're creating blood pressure issues. You're creating your own health issues. That's all I'm saying. I
Yeah.
said you wanting that person over there to hurt and to not forgive him and to imagine the unimaginable happening to him. You know what? That person doesn't even know what you're thinking. He doesn't feel your rage. Who does? You do.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it's when you're ready to forgive.
Yeah.
It's when you're ready to forgive.
Yeah.
And you'll understand. I mean, and Again, it goes back to we're all related. We're all human beings. Things happen. Sometimes they happen to us. Sometimes we're the cause of things happening. It could just as easily be us that's the cause of something happening.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, would you want to be forgiven? You made a mistake. Or
Yeah.
maybe you didn't make a mistake. Maybe it was a callous thing. But now I'm going to destroy myself because that person over there did something awful. Well, who am I helping?
Yeah.
Who am I hurting?
Yeah.
Just me.
Yeah.
And it's still, I mean, through all the words, it's still a tough journey to get to the point of truly forgiving. And it's not an act, it's not a work, it's not a checkbox exercise.
Yeah. Right.
Forgiveness. I forgave. Checkbox.
Okay. Done. Yeah.
It's got
Next.
nothing to do with that. It's the releasing of the anger, the rage, the hurt, the pain. It's the releasing of that. And again, for me, for those who can get there without the understanding that their loved ones are eternal, and without the understanding that they are eternal, I honor them. Wow, you're strong in your faith and your strength, and I'm being redundant, but you're strong. You're strong to be able
Yeah.
to do that. But for me, and the understanding that we are eternal, with all that I've read and all the signs Quentin's given us,
Mm-hmm.
helped me. I mean, I forgave immediately, and through the grace of God, because I wasn't the kind of person. But it helps to understand and allow yourself to forgive. And like I said earlier, Karl, it's the hardest thing to forgive is to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, if I could have found a way to blame myself for the accident, I'm fairly certain I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother level of forgiveness.
Um, so you've mentioned a couple of times signs that you've gotten, and let's talk a little bit about that because that's actually kind of the fun stuff,
It
and
is the fun
that's
stuff.
actually kind of the well, and it's the part that really confirms for us the continuity of the soul beyond the body, and I think that's always a healing journey for people. And so, tell us just a little bit about some of the signs that you've gotten throughout the years from Quentin.
Well, the first sign, and again, I didn't talk like this before. I didn't believe this before. I didn't think about death before. I had no clue. I was a blank slate. So each time something happened, it was this crazy, unbelievable epiphany of, oh my God, look what's happening. The first sign was 30 hours after the accident, just 30 hours after the accident. I'm alone in a room. It's about 11:30 at night or so. I'm going to sleep for the first time since the accident, and I feel my left hand being held. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, my left hand is being held, and I'm trying to understand it.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know what I didn't know at that point. The
Right.
best I could come up with at the time in trying to rationalize why I'm alone in a room and my hand's being held was, wow, that must be the manifestation of all the prayers that I feel my hand being held.
Hmm.
It took me some weeks to realize it was Quentin. And one of the ways I was able to understand that is, let's be real, it was only 30 hours after the accident. The prayers were just getting going. People were just finding out.
Right.
And then when I realized it was my son, it was because my son has the softest hands.
Hmm.
And we would always walk hand in hand.
Yeah.
Me, Christine, we'd always hold his hand.
Yeah.
And he knew that I would eventually figure it out.
Yeah.
It was about 7 weeks, 6 weeks after the accident. I'm not one to wear jewelry, but I have an earring.
Mm-hmm.
I have my son's earring.
Yeah.
And I had a stud at the time, and I'm in his bathroom cleaning the stud because when you get your ear pierced, you got to keep it clean so it doesn't get infected. Across the hall is his bedroom. So, I dry off, get dressed, open the door, the steam's dissipating on the mirror. I'm cleaning my earring, and I see him in the reflection walk across his room.
Oh.
And I
Okay, so
stop.
that's a great one.
I stop what I'm doing, and I turn around and I walk into his bedroom.
Yeah.
thinking it's Christine, it's Cheyenne, it's our nephew TK who was in the room, and I saw them. I go to the room, and there's nobody there. My wife says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I just saw Quentin walk across the room." I mean, from west to east. I mean,
Right. Okay,
a
now
couple
wait
of
a
weeks
second.
after that or so, I'm walking down the hall at 6 in the morning. Everybody's asleep. I walk past Quentin's room and I hear, "Dad." And I'm thinking, that's my son. And I'm
Yeah.
just giddy. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
my son. He said, "Dad." And I laugh and I joke. I feel the energy shift. I laugh and I joke. It's like
Hmm.
I couldn't put it together fast. I'm saying I couldn't ask, "Hey son, how you doing? What's going on?" I couldn't.
Yeah, I
But
know.
it was him. He said, "Dad," and I heard him. I'm awake. I
Yeah.
mean, the
Beautiful.
hummingbirds were going crazy. They were doing unbelievable things, like coming up right in front of Christine and just hovering there,
Uh,
doing things they had never done before.
yeah.
There was a deer that started bedding down outside our window. It had never been done before.
Right.
And Carl, in talking about the signs and in trying to get people to understand that, and I love to do this one-on-one with folks because a sign can be anything. There's
Hmm.
no rules to what a sign is.
Yeah.
A dream visit is pretty common. And when I hear people say, "I had this crazy vivid dream," I make sure they understand what that is. Hummingbirds, birds, animals. Uh, the thing about a sign is how does it make you feel first? Before your mind says, "Nah, that didn't happen."
Right.
Before your mind says, "It's my imagination." How does it make you feel first? And do you describe it as, "Well, that's never happened before. That's
Hmm.
very unusual"? I
Yeah.
listen very closely when people start using terms like that, and I
Uh-huh.
invite them to go back and think about those happenings again.
Yeah, exactly.
Because signs happen all the time. And the voice of spirit is so quiet and subtle.
Yeah.
Every now and then I hear it, but it takes practice.
Yeah.
But
Um,
the signs lay
so
the ground.
question for you. Um, just in terms of your own process, and I know that people probably already know the answer to this, but just tell us a little bit about what the effect of those signs was on you in terms of, keeping you in a positive place and in terms of moving forward, and sort of what kind of value you would place on putting some awareness into that intuitive faculty for that kind of connection.
Karl, it changed everything. It I don't even want to try to imagine how long it would have taken for me to get here. But those signs changed everything. They changed everything. And I'm just blessed that for whatever power, whatever way it happened. I mean, I talk about 30 hours after my hands being held, but
Hmm.
there was a moment 5 days after the accident where it actually pierced my consciousness that my son is still alive. And I wish that for everybody, I wish that for that sudden epiphany, that sudden realization, when it hit me, it took my breath away.
Mm.
I was at a place where I was hunkered down. I was imagining, Quentin alone somewhere in the darkness.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's something happened, and I can go into that if you want. But there was an exchange of
Yeah.
ideas, and something happened, and
Go into it. Go into this. Something happened.
well, everybody came around us. Our families, our friends came to us. We were in Farmington, where Christine was in ICU, and I never had to be hospitalized. It was 5 days after the accident. Christine was now in her regular room. I was the chaplain. That's the word I meant to use before.
Ah.
The chaplain
Okay.
had set us up in a Marriott courtyard, and there were many of us in the group of supporters, including myself and my daughter, who were there. And this one particular morning, I come down to the lobby, and I'm going to go back to the hospital. I spent the first night with Christine, and then subsequent nights, my daughter and mother-in-law took turns spending the nights with her. And I go to the lobby, and a friend of mine picks me up to take me back to the hospital.
Hmm.
Well, after I left the lobby, and this is 7:38 or so, 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
an Indian in full ceremonial gear walked up to a member of our support team, a dear friend of ours. Her name is Chris Voldrich. Walked up to her and clasped her hands and said, "I've just finished performing a ceremony, and a little boy sent me to you,
Oh.
and he wants me to let you know he's fine.
Oh.
He wants me to let you know that Tom, somebody named Tom, is helping him with his transition, and he will eventually help the parents." This gentleman, this Indian in full gear, continued and said, whatever it is with the business side of this, whether it's a lawsuit or an insurance claim, it's going to take longer than you expect, but it's going to work out fine. And released her hands and turned and walked away. So our friend Chris Voldrich and her daughter Layla Voldrich were there watching this. As he walked away, they turned to each other and said, "Did this really happen? Did that just happen?" And they agreed that it had, and they looked up, and he was gone. So she
Wow.
hightailed it to the hospital. She bursts in. She's just frantic. She bursts in, and she says, "Get everybody together. I can only tell this once." I was curled up in a corner, thinking very dark thoughts. She gets us all together, and she tells that story just the way I told you. And at that moment, I mean, everybody in that room was kind of low. I mean, and when you have an accident, you get your support team, if you're blessed enough to have one,
Hmm.
there's moments of levity, and then there's moments where you let your emotions go and you're feeling bad.
Right.
We were feeling low.
Yeah.
And when she said what she said, the energy in the room changed. All of a sudden, everybody lit up. But it hit me. I mean, I don't know how it impacted everybody else. I know the energy in the room changed, but it hit me big.
Yeah.
I did this. Inside my soul went boom.
Yeah.
My son's alive. My son's alive. It was the pivotal moment,
Yeah.
and that's why I talk. That's why I share. That's why there's 2 books out there. I want to give that epiphany to as many as I can. My next thought was sitting there 5 days after the accident, as I had this epiphany. Why didn't I know before? Why didn't I know? Why don't we talk about this all the time? Why
Yeah.
isn't this on the 5 o'clock news? Why isn't this in the front page of the
Yeah.
newspapers?
Right.
And
Yeah.
as the months pass, Karl, and I'm talking to people because you can't shut me up, and they begin to share with me all the signs they get, I know this is normal.
Hmm.
Why don't we talk about this? So I
Yeah.
talk every chance I get.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you do, and because you're right, that actually is what's normal for us. We
See?
are spirit in these physical clothes, and so these are just normal things for us. Though, our physical perceptors want us to accept that it's abnormal and and just weird and sort of
Right.
that, and gratefully we do accept it as miraculous, but even that is not entirely true unless everything's a miracle, and then I'm okay with that. But it's just normal. It's just normal.
It is. It is. I think the indigenous people were more in touch with it. I think the generations of our own culture, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, certainly throughout the world, we're more in touch with it. It's just at a time right now
Yeah.
that people are just lost touch with that. But more and more are waking up.
So
I,
now, Ernie, you mentioned your 2 books. So tell us a little bit about the books, and also where people who I know they're going to be interested and want to, where they can find them.
well, the first book is titled Quentin's Messages, and that's the first book. And I was not an author before. I was not a writer. Quentin's Messages kind of wrote itself over the course of a year. I think that most of the heavy lifting of the writing had been done in probably 5 months.
Yeah.
And it's the before, it's a celebration of Quentin, and then it's a recap of the ahas, all the ahas before the accident. It's a recap of our last vacation together as a family of four. It's a recap of the accident and all of its pain.
Mm-hmm.
Then it gets good, and we talk about how Quentin's visited with us, the signs, and it's a tough book for some who don't know tragedy because they just don't like to get that close to the tragedy. Quentin's Messages impacts a lot of people. Um, I think there's a lot of emotion in Quentin's Messages, and people are it's easier for them to connect with the tragedy and the awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's helped quite a few people, and I'm honored and blessed. Now,
Yeah.
the second book is Quentin's Legacy.
Right.
Uh, this one's a little bit different. There's no tragedy in that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's filling in of the gaps of spiritual experiences that we had along the way. And I've got a nice little, at the beginning of each chapter, I've got a nice little, point to what you should learn, what you should focus on in reading this chapter.
Right.
I've got a really beefy, there's at least, it seems like a half of the book is signs from others. Other people sharing their signs. Because, and again, this isn't signs from people who have written books or I've read. These are signs from others that I've actually met in my life in and around Colorado. So it speaks to the point of this is normal. This
Yeah.
happens to everyone. Let me share how this has happened to others.
Yeah.
And then I actually throw in a chapter about reincarnation, and I know that's another. I think after forgiveness, the reincarnation word is another word that creates disagreement. But in everything that I've read, I believe it's a fact of life. I can now read the New Testament and pick out where I believe that they're referring to reincarnation without using the R word.
Yeah.
I talk about, I've finished the book with a chapter on adversity. And I mean, adversity is the most amazing teacher. It
Yeah.
is the most, I mean, adversity is tough. And I can talk about that and I'll talk about it. And I talk about it all the time. Losing a loved one, being in an accident, being paralyzed. Adversity is the worst. It's the
Yeah.
worst. But I testify that 100% of the time, there's an opportunity to learn something from it.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity to learn something from it. And as opposed to running from it, which I did, I was like, oh, I don't want to go through that. You know what?
Right.
Face it, and understand that you can learn something from it. Or the proverbial, why does this keep happening to me? And that
Uh-huh.
sticking point, it's always painful. Why does this keep? Well, opportunity to break the cycle and go the other way and
Yeah.
learn something.
Yeah.
And it's tough to understand that when you're on your knees, bloody and crying.
Yep.
But our life here has purpose.
Yeah.
Each and every one of us has an individual purpose. We are eternal. We reincarnate, and through the pain, there's something to learn.
Yeah. Agreed. So just real quick, then, Ernie, where can people go and find the books and find out a little bit more about you too?
We are on Amazon. So just get to Amazon and Google or search Quentin's Messages or Quentin's Legacy.
Okay.
And we have a website too,
Okay.
www.quintinsmessages.com. You'll see blogs. You can find videos. There's been a lot of videos over the years.
Yeah.
I'm real easy to get a hold of. We've got a Facebook page for Quentin's Messages and Quentin's Legacy. You know what? If you want to talk, if you need to talk, I am here to have those conversations. I'd love to have a large, be able to get into an auditorium and have these conversations, but that's not what God has in mind for me. I'm
Yeah.
here to talk one-on-one. I'm
Yeah.
here to look in your eyes and get you talking about what you've experienced and help you understand the signs you've received already.
Right.
That's my gift to you. And I'm here. I'm here for all of you.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful, and you are a treasure and a blessing, and thank you so much for coming and sharing your story today, and at least putting the possibility on the table for people that this kind of forgiveness and this kind of process is it's actually possible, even in spite of some pretty extreme circumstances.
It is. No, thank you, Karl.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it more than you know, my friend.
Well, it was my pleasure. So, and so that is Ernie Jackson. And again, if you want to find out more about Ernie, you can go to quintonsmessages.com. And there are 2 books, so you can get more detail and read more about his journey and what has happened and what he went through. And you know, I believe that this is such an important message and such an important show, really, because again, this is somebody who didn't really even have the kind of orientation or foundation that would have led him to a natural understanding. He was just moved in a moment, and he responded, and he had the blessing of not only releasing himself from a huge emotional burden, but also now, you know, through the kind of love that he has within him, he's able to share that with other people, and maybe not, you know, relieve them of similar types of burdens and help them along their journey. So I think it's an important one. I think it's challenging. I think a lot of us find it difficult to forgive somebody because they unfriended us on Facebook. So, you know, I think there's a lot of growth and a lot that we could challenge ourselves individually for in terms of finding places that we could release things, let them go, and ultimately be happier people. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Superpowers. And remember to go out there and experience the extraordinary.